The sound of splintering wood echoed through the California pines like gunfire, and Zara Zimmerman threw her arms over her head as the massive timber came crashing down from the logging operation above. She had been walking through the forest path near Angel's Camp, California, collecting wildflowers for the boarding house where she worked, when the accident happened. The weight of the fallen pine tree slammed across her legs and lower back, pinning her to the forest floor with such force that the air rushed from her lungs in a painful gasp. She could not move, could not breathe properly, and the panic that seized her chest was almost worse than the crushing pressure. Dust and pine needles rained down around her as she struggled to draw breath, her fingers clawing uselessly at the earth. The timber was massive, easily 3 feet thick, and the rough bark pressed into her spine like 1,000 knives. Her vision swam with tears and pain, and she opened her mouth to scream, but only a weak whimper escaped. The forest seemed suddenly too quiet, as if even the birds had been frightened away by the violence of the falling tree. Then she heard bootfalls, heavy and running, crunching through the underbrush toward her. Through her blurred vision, she saw a man materialize from between the trees, tall and broad-shouldered, his hat knocked back on his head as he took in the scene. He dropped to his knees beside her immediately, his sun-bronzed hands reaching out to assess the situation. "Do not move," he said, his voice rough but steady. "I am going to get you out of this." She tried to speak, to tell him it was impossible, that the tree was too heavy, but her breath came in shallow gasps. The pain was spreading through her body like wildfire, and black spots danced at the edges of her vision. She watched through tear-blurred eyes as the cowboy positioned himself beside the massive timber, his jaw set with determination. "On 3, he said, though whether he was speaking to her or himself, she could not tell. 1, 2, 3. The muscles in his arms and shoulders bunched beneath his work shirt as he gripped the rough bark and began to lift. His face flushed red with effort, veins standing out on his neck, and Zara heard a sound that was half growl, half roar tear from his throat. The timber shifted, rising inch by impossible inch as the cowboy strained against its weight. His boots dug into the soft earth, his entire body trembling with the exertion, but he did not stop. The pressure on her back eased slightly, and Zara gasped in a full breath of air. The cowboy adjusted his grip, his hands raw and bleeding from the bark, and lifted higher. Sweat poured down his face, dripping from his jaw, but his eyes remained fixed on the task with an intensity that was almost frightening. "Pull yourself out," he gritted through clenched teeth. "Now." She tried to move, but her legs would not cooperate. The pain was too intense, her body too shocked. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks as she shook her head weakly. "I cannot," she whispered. Something fierce flashed in his eyes. With a tremendous effort that made every muscle in his body stand out like rope, he lifted the timber another few inches higher, then shuffled his position. In a movement that defied logic, he wedged his shoulder under the timber and held it there with his back and legs, his hands now free. The weight pressing down on him must have been tremendous, yet he reached for her with those bleeding hands. "Take hold of me," he commanded. Zara's trembling fingers found his shirt front, and she gripped the fabric with all the strength she had left. The cowboy wrapped one arm around her waist and pulled, dragging her across the forest floor and out from under the timber. The moment she was clear, he dove to the side, and the massive tree crashed back down to earth with a thunderous boom that shook the ground. They lay there in the pine needles for a moment, both breathing hard. Zara still clutched his shirt in her fists, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly become terrifyingly fragile. Her entire body shook with shock and residual fear, and she found she could not release her grip on the fabric even though they were safe now. The cowboy rolled onto his side, his arm still around her, and looked down at her with eyes that were the color of spring grass. His face was inches from hers, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in those green eyes, could feel the warmth of his breath on her cheek. "You are safe now," he said softly, and something in his voice made her believe him absolutely. "You saved my life," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. He helped her sit up carefully, his hands gentle despite their raw, bleeding state. "Can you move your legs?" Zara tried, and though pain shot through her back and hips, she could feel her feet could wiggle her toes inside her boots. She nodded, relief flooding through her. "Yes, yes, I think so." The cowboy sat back on his heels, finally allowing himself to show the exhaustion that must have been coursing through him. His chest heaved, and his arms trembled slightly from the incredible effort he had just expended. Blood dripped from his palms where the bark had torn the skin, and his shirt was soaked through with sweat. "What is your name?" Zara asked, finally releasing her death grip on his shirt, though part of her wanted to keep holding on. "Jacob Harris," he replied, wiping his forehead with the back of his wrist. "I work one of the ranches south of town. Was bringing some horses through when I heard the timber fall." "Zara Zimmerman," she said. "I work at the Golden Eagle boarding house in Angel's Camp. I was just collecting flowers and then—" Her voice broke, the reality of how close she had come to death suddenly overwhelming her. Jacob reached out and took her hand in his, seemingly unconcerned about the blood from his own wounds. "You are safe now, Miss Zimmerman. That is what matters." In the distance, they could hear voices calling out, the logging crew finally realizing something had gone wrong. Jacob helped Zara to her feet, supporting her weight when her legs threatened to buckle. She leaned against him, acutely aware of the solid strength of his body, the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm when she placed her hand on his chest to steady herself. "Can you walk?" he asked. "I think so. With help." He wrapped his arm around her waist again, taking most of her weight as they began to make their way through the forest toward the voices. Each step sent jolts of pain through her back and legs, but Zara bit her lip and kept moving. She was alive. This stranger, this cowboy named Jacob Harris, had done the impossible to save her life. When they emerged from the trees onto the logging road, 3 men in work clothes came running up, their faces pale with shock when they saw Zara's condition and the blood on Jacob's hands. "Good Lord, what happened?" the oldest of them asked, a grizzled man with a gray beard. "One of your timbers fell on this lady," Jacob said, his voice taking on a hard edge. "Nearly killed her. What kind of operation are you running here that you are dropping trees where people walk?" The men exchanged guilty looks. "We had warnings posted," one of them said defensively, but the excuse sounded weak even to Zara's ears. "Your warnings did not stop your tree from falling on her," Jacob shot back. "Someone needs to answer for this." "Let us get her to the doctor first," the older man said. "We can sort out the rest later. Miss, I am terribly sorry. This should never have happened." They brought around a wagon, and Jacob lifted Zara onto the back as carefully as if she were made of glass. He climbed up beside her, never letting go of her hand. As the wagon began the bumpy journey back to Angel's Camp, Zara found herself studying his profile. He had a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of stubble, a straight nose that looked like it might have been broken once, and those remarkable green eyes that seemed to see right through to her soul. "Your hands," she said, noticing again how badly torn they were. "You need care too." Jacob glanced down at his palms as if he had forgotten about his injuries. "These will heal. I have had worse." "You could have died," Zara said, the realization hitting her fully for the first time. That timber could have crushed you too when you lifted it. He looked at her then, his expression serious. I could not leave you there. Something in those simple words made Zara's heart skip in her chest. She had been saved by men before, helped out of difficult situations by well-meaning strangers, but this felt different. Jacob Harris had risked everything, had pushed his body beyond what should have been possible to save her life. He had not hesitated, had not weighed the danger to himself. He had simply acted. The ride back to Angel's camp took nearly an hour, and by the time they arrived, Zara's back had stiffened up painfully. Dr. Morrison, a kindly older gentleman who had practiced medicine in the California gold country for 20 years, examined her thoroughly in his office above the general store. Jacob waited outside, refusing to leave until he knew she was all right. You are remarkably fortunate, young lady, Dr. Morrison said as he finished his examination. Bruised ribs, deep tissue damage to your back and legs, but no broken bones that I can detect. You will be in considerable pain for the next few weeks, but you should make a full recovery. The man who pulled you out, he said he lifted that timber off you. Zara nodded. The doctor shook his head in wonder. I would not have believed it possible. The strength that would require is simply astounding. He must care for you a great deal. He did not know me, Zara said softly. He is a stranger who happened to be passing by. Dr. Morrison's eyebrows rose. Is that so? Well, he is a remarkable young man then. You make sure to keep him close, Miss Zimmerman. Men like that do not come along every day. After the doctor bandaged her worst scrapes and gave her instructions for care, Zara limped out to the waiting room where Jacob sat on a hard wooden bench, his hat in his hands. He stood immediately when he saw her, his eyes searching her face. What did the doctor say? I will heal, Zara told him. Thanks to you. Now let him look at your hands. Jacob tried to protest, but Dr. Morrison was already ushering him into the examination room. Zara waited, lowering herself carefully onto the bench Jacob had vacated. Her entire body ached, a deep, bone-level pain that made her eyes water, but she was alive. She could feel the sunshine coming through the window, could hear the sounds of Angel's camp going about its business outside. She was alive. When Jacob emerged 20 minutes later, his hands were wrapped in clean white bandages. He paid Dr. Morrison despite the doctor's protests, then offered Zara his arm. Let me walk you home, he said. The Golden Eagle boarding house was only 3 blocks away, but it might as well have been 3 miles with how slowly Zara had to move. Jacob matched his pace to hers without complaint, his arm steady beneath her hand. People they passed on the wooden sidewalk stared at them, this odd pair of injured strangers, but Jacob paid them no mind. You have family here? He asked as they walked. No, Zara said. My parents died of fever when I was 16. I came west from Missouri 2 years ago, looking for a fresh start. Mrs. Henderson, who runs the boarding house, gave me work and a place to stay. What about you? I came out from Texas 5 years back, Jacob said. Got tired of the heat and the dust storms. Heard California had green hills and opportunity, so I pointed my horse west and kept riding until I got here. Been working the Double Bar Ranch ever since. It is good land, good work. They reached the boarding house, a 3-story building painted cheerful yellow with white trim. Mrs. Henderson, a stout woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a generous heart, came rushing out the moment she saw Zara's condition. Merciful heavens, child, what happened to you? Zara explained about the fallen timber while Mrs. Henderson clucked her tongue and ushered them both inside. She settled Zara in the parlor and brought tea, insisting that Jacob sit and rest as well. When she learned what he had done, how he had lifted that massive timber with his bare hands to save Zara's life, She looked at him with something approaching awe. "Young man, you are welcome at this house any time," she said firmly. "Free of charge. What you did today, well, there are not words adequate to express my gratitude. Zara is like a daughter to me." Jacob looked uncomfortable with the praise. "I only did what anyone would have done." "No," Zara said quietly. "Most people would have run for help, and I would have died before they returned. You did something extraordinary, Jacob Harris. You should accept that." His green eyes met hers, and something passed between them in that moment. Something Zara could not quite name but could feel in the very center of her chest like a warm glow. Jacob cleared his throat and looked away first, his tan cheeks slightly flushed. "I should get back to the ranch," he said, setting down his teacup. "Boss will wonder where I got to with those horses." "Will you come back?" Zara found herself asking before she could stop herself. "To visit, I mean. I would like to thank you properly when I am not quite so battered." A slow smile spread across Jacob's face, transforming his serious features into something that made Zara's breath catch. "I would like that, Miss Zimmerman. Very much." After he left, Mrs. Henderson helped Zara up to her small room on the second floor and insisted she rest. But Zara found she could not sleep despite her exhaustion. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Jacob's face, strained with effort, his entire being focused on saving her. She had never seen such raw determination, such courage. And those eyes, those green eyes that had looked at her with such concern and care even though they had been strangers. She touched her chest where her shirt was wrinkled from her grip on his. She could still feel the texture of the fabric between her fingers, still remember the desperate need to hold on to him as he pulled her to safety. It had felt like holding on to life itself. The next 3 days passed in a haze of pain and enforced bed rest. Dr. Morrison came by twice to check on her progress, pronouncing himself satisfied that she was healing properly. The logging company sent a representative who stammered apologies and offered compensation, which Zara accepted because she would not be able to work for several weeks and needed the money. Mrs. Henderson brought her meals and fussed over her like a mother hen, and the other boarders stopped by to offer their sympathy and well wishes. But it was Jacob she thought about as she lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. She wondered if he would really come back or if his promise had been mere politeness. She wondered what he was doing at his ranch, if his hands were healing properly, if he thought about her at all. On the 4th day, she finally felt strong enough to come downstairs and sit in the parlor. Mrs. Henderson had just brought her some embroidery to work on when there was a knock at the front door. Zara's heart jumped into her throat when she heard Jacob's voice in the entrance hall, deep and polite as he asked after her. "Miss Zimmerman is in the parlor, Mrs. Henderson said, and Zara could hear the smile in her voice. "Go right in, Mr. Harris." Jacob appeared in the doorway, hat in hand, and Zara set aside her embroidery. He had cleaned up since she last saw him, his face freshly shaven, his dark hair damp and combed back. He wore a clean shirt and vest, and his boots were polished. He looked nervous, she realized with a flutter of pleasure. "Miss Zimmerman," he said, inclining his head, "I hope I am not intruding." "Not at all," Zara assured him. "Please sit and call me Zara. Only if you call me Jacob." He settled into the chair across from her, his bandaged hands resting on his knees. "How are you feeling?" "Better every day, sore but better." "Your hands?" He flexed his fingers experimentally. "Healing well. Dr. Morrison says I should have full use of them within a week or 2. An awkward silence fell between them. Zara searched for something to say, acutely aware that this man had seen her at her most vulnerable, had held her and saved her, yet she knew almost nothing about him. But before she could speak, Jacob leaned forward slightly, his expression earnest. "I have not been able to stop thinking about you," he said, the words tumbling out as if he had been holding them back with effort. "About what happened. I keep seeing you trapped under that timber and he stopped, shook his head. "I am not good with words, never have been. But I needed to see you again to make sure you were truly all right." Zara's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he must be able to hear it. "I have thought about you too. Every day. Every hour, really. What you did, Jacob, the risk you took. I owe you my life." "You owe me nothing," he said firmly. "I am just grateful I was there, that I could help." "Would you tell me about yourself?" Zara asked. "I want to know more about the man who saved me." So Jacob talked, his initial hesitance fading as Zara asked questions and listened with genuine interest. He told her about growing up on a small ranch in Texas, the youngest of 4 boys. His father had died when he was 15, kicked by a horse, and his mother had remarried a man who had no love for his stepchildren. At 18, Jacob had taken his inheritance, bought a good horse, and headed west to make his own way. "I wanted land of my own someday," he said, staring out the parlor window at the street beyond. "A place where I could build something lasting, raise a family. The double bar is good work, and Mr. Patterson is a fair boss, but it is not mine. I have been saving every penny I can, hoping to buy my own spread someday." "That is a fine dream," Zara said softly. "I hope you achieve it." Jacob turned back to her, his green eyes searching her face. "What about you? What are your dreams, Zara?" No one had ever asked her that before. Zara considered the question, surprised to find she had an answer ready. "I want a home," she said. "A real home with people I love and who love me. I want to belong somewhere to someone. After my parents died, I felt so adrift, like a leaf on the wind. I want roots. I want to matter to someone." "You matter," Jacob said, his voice rough. "You matter to Mrs. Henderson, clearly, and you matter to me." The statement hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Zara felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she did not look away from his intense gaze. "We barely know each other," she pointed out, though her heart was not in the objection. "I know that you are brave," Jacob said. "Even trapped and in pain, you did not give in to panic. I know you have a kind heart, the way you worried about my hands when you were the one who had been crushed. I know you work hard, that you lost your parents too young, that you came west looking for something better. And I know that when I look at you, something inside me feels right in a way it never has before." Zara could not breathe. She had read about moments like this in the novels Mrs. Henderson sometimes loaned her, but she had never believed they were real. She had thought love was something that grew slowly, carefully, over months and years of courtship. But this feeling blooming in her chest, this certainty that Jacob Harris was someone special, someone who could change her life, felt anything but slow or careful. "I feel it too," she whispered. "From the moment you pulled me free, from the moment I gripped your shirt and held on, I have felt connected to you somehow." Jacob stood and crossed to where she sat, kneeling beside her chair so they were at eye level. He took her hand gently in his bandaged ones, his touch feather light. "I know it is too soon," he said. "I know I should court you properly, take my time, do this right. But Zara, I almost lost you before I even knew you. When I saw that timber crushing you, something in my chest just seized up. The thought of you dying, of never having the chance to know you, was unbearable. So I am going to be honest with you, even if it is too soon, even if it frightens you away. I want to court you. I want to come by every day if you will let me. I want to know everything about you, want you to know everything about me. And if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, then maybe someday we could have those dreams we talked about, together." Tears pricked at Zara's eyes, but they were good tears, joyful tears. "Yes," she said, squeezing his hands. "Yes to all of it. I want that too, Jacob, so very much." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after a long night. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. In that moment, Zara knew with absolute certainty that her life had just changed forever, and she embraced it with her whole heart. Over the following weeks, as Zara healed, Jacob came to visit her every day. He would arrive in the late afternoon, after his work at the ranch was done, and they would sit in the parlor or on the boarding house's wide front porch and talk for hours. He told her about his work with the horses, about the wild beauty of the California landscape, about his hopes and fears and dreams. She told him about her childhood in Missouri, about the pain of losing her parents, about her journey west, and the kindness Mrs. Henderson had shown her. Mrs. Henderson herself was delighted by the courtship blossoming under her roof. She would bring them lemonade and cookies, then disappear with a knowing smile, giving them as much privacy as was proper. The other boarders grew accustomed to seeing Jacob's tall form on the porch, his hat set aside, his attention completely focused on Zara. As her body healed, Zara found her heart opening in ways she had not thought possible. Jacob was nothing like the men who occasionally tried to court her in Angel's camp, the miners and merchants who saw her as a pretty face and little else. Jacob asked her opinions, listened when she spoke about books she had read or ideas she had. He treated her as an equal, a partner, someone whose thoughts and feelings mattered as much as his own. One evening, nearly a month after the accident, they sat on the porch swing together as the sun set over the California hills. Zara's injuries had healed to the point where she could move normally again, though her back still ached if she stood for too long. Jacob's hands had healed completely, the torn skin replaced by new calluses from his ranch work. "I talked to Mr. Patterson today," Jacob said, his arm resting along the back of the swing behind Zara's shoulders. "Asked him about buying some of his land." Zara turned to look at him, her heart quickening. "What did he say?" "He said he had been thinking about selling off the northern section, about 300 acres that border the creek. Good grazing land, water year-round, and a spot that would be perfect for building a house." Jacob paused, his jaw working as if he were wrestling with his words. "He would give me a fair price, let me pay it off over time. I could start building this fall, have a house ready by next spring." "Jacob, that is wonderful," Zara said, taking his hand. "Your dream is coming true." He looked down at their joined hands, his thumb stroking across her knuckles. "It would not be complete without you there to share it." Zara's breath caught. "What are you saying?" Jacob shifted on the swing so he was facing her fully, his green eyes intense in the fading light. "I am saying that I love you, Zara Zimmerman. I know it has only been a month, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love your kindness and your strength. I love the way you laugh, the way you see the good in people, the way you make me want to be a better man. I love you, and I want to build that house for you, for us. I want to give you the home you dreamed about, the place where you belong." Tears spilled down Zara's cheeks as joy flooded through her like sunlight. "I love you too," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I think I started loving you the moment you pulled me from under that timber, when I held onto you and felt safer than I have ever felt in my life. Yes, Jacob. Yes to everything." He cupped her face in his calloused hands and kissed her then, gentle and sweet and full of promise. It was Zara's first kiss, and it felt like coming home after a long journey. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Jacob pressed his forehead to hers. "I will do right by you," he promised. "I will work hard and build us a good life. You will never regret choosing me." "I know," Zara whispered. "I have never been more certain of anything." They were married 6 weeks later in the small white church on the hill above Angel's camp. Mrs. Henderson cried through the entire ceremony, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Mr. Patterson and several of the ranch hands attended, along with most of the boarding house residents and half the town, it seemed. Word had spread about the cowboy who had lifted a timber with his bare hands to save his sweetheart, and the story had taken on an almost legendary quality. Zara wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her dark hair. Jacob wore his best suit, his hair combed back, his face clean-shaven, and when he saw Zara walking down the aisle toward him, his eyes grew suspiciously bright. "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," he whispered when she reached him. The Reverend performed the ceremony, and when it came time for the vows, Jacob's voice was steady and sure as he promised to love and cherish Zara for all his days. Zara's voice shook with emotion, but she meant every word with her whole heart. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, Jacob kissed her in front of the entire congregation, and the church erupted in cheers and applause. The reception was held at the boarding house with Mrs. Henderson outdoing herself with food and decorations. There was music and dancing, and Jacob proved to be surprisingly graceful on his feet, spinning Zara around the makeshift dance floor in the parlor until she was breathless and laughing. It was, Zara thought, the happiest day of her life. That night, Jacob brought her home to the small cabin on the Double Bar Ranch where he had been living. It was rustic but clean, with a stone fireplace and a sturdy wooden bed that Jacob had made himself. He carried her over the threshold despite her laughing protests, and as he set her down gently, his expression grew serious. "I know this place is not much," he said, "but it is just temporary. I will start building our real home next week. I want to give you everything, Zara." She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "You already have," she said. "You gave me yourself, your love, your name. That is everything I need." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Zara surrendered herself to the love that had grown so quickly and yet felt so right. This man had risked everything to save her life, and now he was giving her the home and family she had always dreamed of. She held onto him the way she had held his shirt that day in the forest, with complete trust and absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The following weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. Zara continued working at the boarding house during the day, though Mrs. Henderson insisted on reducing her hours. Jacob worked the ranch, and in every spare moment he began work on their new house. He chose a spot on a gentle hill overlooking the creek, where oak trees provided shade and the view stretched for miles. The land was beautiful, rolling green hills dotted with wildflowers and grazing cattle, with the Sierra Nevada mountains rising purple and majestic in the distance. On weekends, Zara would ride out to the building site and bring Jacob lunch. She would sit on a blanket in the shade and watch him work, marveling at the way he moved, the easy strength in his body as he lifted beams and hammered nails. He worked with the same focused determination he had shown when lifting that timber off her, and slowly but surely, the frame of their house began to rise. "It will have 3 bedrooms," he told her one Saturday afternoon as they ate sandwiches and drank cool water from his canteen. "1 for us, and 2 for the children we will have someday." "Children," Zara repeated, warmth spreading through her chest at the thought. "How many are you planning, Mr. Harris?" He grinned at her, that rare, full smile that made her heart skip. "As many as you will give me, Mrs. Harris." "I was the youngest of 4, and I loved growing up with brothers. I want that for our children too, that sense of family." "I would like that," Zara said softly. "A house full of love and laughter, children running through these hills. It sounds perfect." By the time fall arrived, painting the California hills gold and red, the house was nearly complete. It was a beautiful structure, 2 stories with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Jacob had put windows in every room to catch the light and the views, and he had built Zara a kitchen that was the envy of every woman in Angel's Camp. There was a parlor with that stone fireplace, a dining room, and upstairs, those 3 bedrooms he had promised. They moved in on a crisp October morning, with help from Mr. Patterson and the ranch hands. Mrs. Henderson came out with curtains she had sewn as a housewarming gift, and she cried again as she hugged Zara goodbye. "You have found your home, dear girl," she said, cupping Zara's face in her hands. "I am so happy for you." "Thank you," Zara said, her own eyes damp, "for everything, for giving me a chance when I had nothing, for being the family I needed. I will never forget your kindness." That night, as Zara and Jacob stood on their new porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jacob wrapped his arms around her from behind and rested his chin on top of her head. "Are you happy?" he asked. Zara leaned back against his solid warmth, her hands covering his where they rested on her stomach. "More than I ever thought possible. This house, this land, this life with you, it is more than I ever dared to dream of. It is only the beginning," Jacob promised. "I am going to spend the rest of my life making you happy, Zara Harris. That is my vow to you." As winter settled over Angel's Camp, Zara and Jacob settled into married life. Jacob officially bought the land from Mr. Patterson and began building his herd, starting with a dozen head of cattle. Zara turned their house into a home, sewing curtains and quilts, planting a garden that would bloom come spring. They attended church on Sundays and dinner at the main ranch house once a month, and slowly they became a known and respected part of the community. People in town still talked about how they met, about the fallen timber and the incredible feat of strength that had saved Zara's life. But to Jacob and Zara, it was simply the beginning of their story, the moment when 2 lonely souls had found each other against all odds. In February, Zara realized she was pregnant. She waited until she was certain before telling Jacob, and when she finally shared the news one evening after supper, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around the kitchen with a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way to the main ranch house. "A baby," he kept saying, his hands gentle as they came to rest on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Zara asked, though his joy was evident in every line of his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Jacob said, kissing her soundly. "You have made me the luckiest man in California, Zara Harris." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and into the summer. Zara's garden bloomed, a riot of vegetables and flowers that she tended with care. Her body changed, growing round with their child, and Jacob treated her like she was made of spun glass. He insisted on doing all the heavy work around the house, would not let her so much as lift a bucket of water. At night, he would talk to her belly, telling their unborn child stories about the ranch and the land, about the family they would be. "I love you already, little one," he would say, his large hand spread across the swell of her stomach. "I cannot wait to meet you." In late September, on a clear morning when the air smelled of autumn and wood smoke, Zara went into labor. Jacob rode like the devil himself was chasing him to fetch Dr. Morrison, and the good doctor arrived just in time. Mrs. Henderson came too, having somehow sensed she was needed, and she held Zara's hand and wiped her brow through the long hours of labor. Jacob paced the parlor like a caged animal, flinching every time he heard Zara cry out. He had faced down wild horses and angry steers without batting an eye, but hearing his wife in pain nearly undid him. "This is the natural way of things, son," Mr. Patterson told him, having ridden over when he heard the news. "Women are stronger than we give them credit for. Your Zara will be fine." And she was. Just as the sun was setting, painting their home in golden light, Zara gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Dr. Morrison cleaned the infant and wrapped him in a blanket, then carried him out to the parlor where Jacob was wearing a path in the floorboards. "Congratulations, Mr. Harris," the doctor said, his lined face wreathed in smiles. "You have a son, and your wife is doing well, tired but healthy. You can go in and see them now." Jacob took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart pounding. He entered their bedroom to find Zara propped up against the pillows, her hair damp with sweat, her face pale but radiant. Mrs. Henderson stood beside the bed, beaming, and she stepped aside so Jacob could approach. "Come meet your son," Zara said, her voice hoarse but filled with joy. Jacob knelt beside the bed and looked down at the tiny bundle in Zara's arms. The baby had a shock of dark hair and a red, wrinkled face, his little fists waving in the air. As Jacob watched, his son opened his eyes, and Jacob felt something shift fundamentally in his chest. This was his child, his and Zara's, a perfect little person they had created together. "He is beautiful," Jacob said, his voice rough with emotion. "You are beautiful. Thank you, Zara. Thank you for this gift. What should we name him?" Zara asked, shifting so Jacob could sit on the edge of the bed beside her. They had discussed names for months, but now, looking at his son's face, only one seemed to fit. "James," Jacob said. "James Michael Harris, after my father and yours." Zara's eyes filled with tears. "James," she whispered, looking down at the baby. "Hello, James. Welcome to your home." The next weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and intense joy. James proved to have strong lungs and definite opinions about when he wanted to eat. But Jacob and Zara adapted to parenthood with the same determination they had brought to everything else in their lives. Jacob would walk the floor with James in the middle of the night, talking softly to his son about the ranch and the horses and the life they would build together. "You are going to love it here, James," he would say, the baby small and warm against his chest. "There are creeks to fish and hills to explore. I will teach you to ride, to work the land, to be a good man, and your mother will teach you to be kind and brave the way she is." Zara would watch them from the bedroom doorway, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. This life, this family, this home, it was everything she had ever wanted and more than she had dared to hope for. Sometimes she thought back to that day in the forest, to the terror of being trapped under that timber, and she marveled at how that one horrible moment had led to all of this joy. James grew into a happy, healthy baby, and then a curious toddler. He had Jacob's green eyes and Zara's dark hair, and his laugh was the sweetest sound either of them had ever heard. When he took his first steps, Jacob cheered and Zara cried, and they both agreed that parenthood was simultaneously the hardest and most rewarding thing they had ever done. 2 years after James was born, Zara gave birth to a daughter they named Jane. She had her father's solemn intensity and her mother's sweet nature, and Jacob carried her everywhere, this tiny girl who had stolen his heart completely. James was initially uncertain about the new baby who took up so much of his parents' attention, but he quickly grew to love his little sister, appointing himself her protector. The years passed in a warm blur of family dinners and lazy summer afternoons, of Christmases around their fireplace and birthdays celebrated with cake and joy. Jacob's ranch prospered, his herd growing year by year until he was one of the most successful ranchers in the county. Zara kept their home beautiful and warm, raised their children with love and discipline, and never once regretted the choice she had made to marry this strong, steady man who had saved her life. On their 5th anniversary, Jacob gave Zara a locket made of California gold, with tiny photographs of James and Jane inside. Zara gave him a leather-bound journal where she had written down the story of how they met, of the fallen timber and his incredible rescue, so their children and grandchildren would always know. "I want them to know what kind of man their father is," she told him as they sat on the porch swing, the children asleep upstairs. "I want them to know about your courage and your strength, about the day you pulled me from under that timber and I gripped your shirt and held on. That was the day my real life began." Jacob pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "You gave my life meaning, Zara. Before you, I was just drifting, working toward some vague dream of land and cattle. But you made it real. You are my home, the place I belong. You and our children are everything to me." They sat in comfortable silence, rocking gently on the swing, watching the stars come out over the California hills. In the distance, cattle lowed softly, and an owl hooted from the oak trees by the creek. It was a perfect moment, one of thousands they had shared and would share in the years to come. When James was 8 and Jane was 6, Zara gave birth to another son, this one named Joshua. He came into the world screaming with indignation, and he kept that fiery temperament as he grew. Where James was serious and thoughtful, Joshua was wild and adventurous, always climbing things he should not, always exploring beyond where he was supposed to go. He kept Zara constantly on her toes, but she loved him fiercely, this little daredevil who reminded her so much of his father. 2 years later came twin girls, Julia and Josephine, identical in looks but opposite in temperament. Julia was quiet and dreamy, always lost in her imagination, while Josephine was practical and determined, already showing signs of her father's work ethic at age 4. The house was full to bursting with noise and love and chaos, exactly as Jacob had dreamed all those years ago. On summer evenings, the whole family would gather on the big porch, and Jacob would tell stories while Zara knitted and the children played. He told them about coming west from Texas, about building the ranch from nothing, about the day he met their mother. The children never tired of hearing about the fallen timber, about how their father had lifted something impossibly heavy to save the woman he loved. "Did you know right away that Mama was special?" Jane asked one evening, leaning against her father's knee. Jacob looked across the porch to where Zara sat in her rocking chair, her hands busy with her knitting, her face peaceful in the lamplight. Their eyes met, and the love that passed between them was almost tangible. "I knew," he said simply. "The moment I saw her, even trapped and frightened, I knew she was someone extraordinary, and every day since then has only confirmed it." "That is very romantic," Julia sighed. "Romantic nothing," Joshua said with the scorn of a 10-year-old boy. "It is about being brave and strong. When I grow up, I am going to be as strong as Papa and save someone too." "You will do many brave things, I am sure," Jacob said, ruffling his son's hair. "But strength is not just about lifting heavy things. It is about doing what is right even when it is hard, about protecting those who cannot protect themselves, about being faithful and true. Your mother has that kind of strength too, and it is just as important as the muscles in my arms." Zara smiled at him, her heart swelling with love for this man who had given her everything. She thought about the girl she had been, alone and frightened under that fallen timber, and the woman she had become. Jacob had saved her life that day, but in many ways she had saved his too. They had saved each other, really. Two lonely people who had found in each other the home they both desperately needed. As the years continued to pass, the Harris family became a fixture in Angel's camp. Jacob served on the town council and helped organize the county fair every summer. Zara joined the church ladies' auxiliary and taught Sunday school, and their children grew up running wild through the California hills, loved and secure. James grew into a serious young man who showed a talent for working with horses that even surpassed his father's abilities. By the time he was 16, people from all over the county were bringing him animals to train. Jane became a teacher, gentle and patient with her students, beloved by the whole town. Joshua followed his father into ranching, though his impulsive nature meant Jacob had to rein him in regularly. The twins, now young women, were courted by half the eligible men in 3 counties. But they were in no hurry to marry, content to help their mother run the household and pursue their own interests. On Jacob and Zara's 20th anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. All 5 children were there, plus a few grandchildren already, as James had married a sweet girl from a neighboring ranch and started his own family. The house that Jacob had built with his own hands was full of laughter and love. 3 generations gathered to celebrate the love that had started it all. After dinner, as the younger children played in the yard and the adults lingered over coffee, Jacob stood and cleared his throat. The room fell silent, everyone turning to look at him. 20 years ago, he began, his voice still as strong as ever though his hair was now threaded with gray. I was just a ranch hand with a dream and an empty heart. Then one day, I heard a tree falling in the forest, and I found a beautiful woman trapped and in need of help. I did not know it then, but that was the most important day of my life. Because that was the day I met Zara, and nothing has been the same since. He turned to where his wife sat beside him, her hand in his. She was still beautiful to him, more beautiful even than she had been at 20, her face lined now with laughter and love, her dark hair silvered but her eyes as bright as ever. "You have given me everything," Jacob said, his voice thick with emotion. "A home, a family, a purpose. You have stood beside me through good times and hard times. You have been my partner, my best friend, the love of my life. And I want you to know that if I could go back to that day in the forest, knowing everything that would come after, I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Lifting that timber was the easiest thing I have ever done, because the reward was you." Zara was crying now, happy tears streaming down her face. She stood and wrapped her arms around her husband, and their children cheered and applauded. It was a perfect moment, a crystallization of 20 years of love and partnership and family. That night, after everyone had gone home or gone to bed, Jacob and Zara walked down to the creek hand in hand. The moon was full, painting the water silver, and the California hills rolled away into the darkness around them. They stood on the bank where Jacob had first shown Zara this land, where he had told her about his dreams all those years ago. "You remember standing here with me that first time?" Jacob asked, his arm around her shoulders. "I remember everything," Zara said. "Every moment, every word. This place is magical to me because it is where we began to build our life together." "We have built something good, haven't we?" Jacob said, more statement than question. "We have built something extraordinary," Zara corrected. "A family, a legacy, a love that will endure long after we are gone. Our children will tell their children about us, about how we met, about the love we shared. We will live on through them." Jacob pulled her close and kissed her, still passionate after 20 years, and Zara melted into his embrace. This man, this strong, steady, loving man, was her home and her heart. He always would be. The years continued to roll by, bringing both joy and sorrow as life inevitably does. Mr. Patterson passed away, leaving the main ranch to his nephew, but ensuring that Jacob's land was secure forever. Mrs. Henderson died peacefully in her sleep at 80, and Zara wept at her funeral, mourning the woman who had been like a mother to her. But there were joys, 2 more grandchildren, then great-grandchildren, a growing family tree that spread its branches wide. James took over more and more of the ranch operation as Jacob grew older, and Joshua started his own spread on adjacent land. Jane married a doctor and moved to Sacramento, though she came home often with her children. The twins eventually married brothers and settled in Angel's Camp, remaining close to their parents. The house on the hill was always full of family, always echoing with laughter and love. On their 40th anniversary, Jacob and Zara sat on their porch swing, the same swing where he had first told her he loved her all those years ago. They were in their 60s now, their hair white, their bodies showing the wear of hard work and long lives. But the love in their eyes when they looked at each other was unchanged, as fresh and vital as it had been that first day. 40 years, Zara marveled, her head resting on Jacob's shoulder. "Can you believe it?" "Sometimes it feels like yesterday," Jacob said. "Other times, I cannot remember a time when you were not beside me. You are part of me, Zara, the best part." "I have been so blessed," Zara said softly. "That day in the forest when that timber fell, I thought my life was ending, but really it was just beginning." "You saved me, Jacob, in so many ways." "We saved each other," Jacob corrected, the same words he had spoken so many times over the years. "You gave me something to live for, something to work toward. You made me a better man." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the hills they loved, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. In the distance, they could see James and his family working with the cattle, could hear the laughter of grandchildren playing in the yard. The ranch was thriving, the family was healthy and happy, and the love that had started it all still burned bright. Jacob died peacefully in his sleep 3 years later, at the age of 68. He had spent his last day working on the ranch he loved, riding the fence line with James and Joshua, talking about plans for the spring planting. That night, he had kissed Zara goodnight, told her he loved her as he did every single night of their marriage, and closed his eyes for the last time. Zara mourned him with a grief that was almost unbearable, but she also celebrated the life they had shared. He had given her 43 years of love and partnership, 5 children, 17 grandchildren, and 6 great-grandchildren. He had built her a home that still stood strong, had created a legacy that would endure for generations. And most importantly, he had loved her with his whole heart every single day of their marriage. She lived for another 7 years, surrounded by family, still sharp and loving even as her body grew frail. On warm afternoons, she would sit on the porch and tell stories to her great-grandchildren, about the wild west of her youth, about the day their great-grandfather had pulled her from under a fallen timber with his bare hands, about how she had gripped his shirt and held on, and in that moment, found her soulmate. "Did you love him very much, great-grandma?" a little girl asked one day. Zara smiled, her weathered hand resting over her heart. "With everything I was and everything I had, sweetheart. He was my home, my heart, my everything. And someday, if you are very lucky, you will find that kind of love too." She passed away on a clear October morning, the California hills blazing with autumn color. The family buried her next to Jacob on the hill, overlooking the creek, where they had built their house and raised their family and loved each other for more than 4 decades. The Harris Ranch continued to thrive, passing through the generations, each one adding their own chapter to the family story. But they all remembered Jacob and Zara, the couple whose love had started it all. The story of the fallen timber became family legend, told and retold around dinner tables and campfires, a testament to courage and love and the power of 2 people who chose each other against all odds. Their house still stands on that hill, now home to their great-great-grandchildren, but the porch swing remains, weathered by time but still strong. On summer evenings, if you listen carefully, some say you can almost hear the echo of voices. A man and a woman talking softly, laughing together, living out the dreams they once shared. The story of Jacob and Zara Harris became woven into the very fabric of Angels Camp's history. The local schoolteacher would sometimes bring her students to the old Harris Ranch, now a sprawling operation that employed dozens of people and stretched across thousands of acres, to tell them about the town's history. She would point to the house on the hill and tell them about the cowboy who built it with his bare hands for the woman he saved and loved. The church where they were married still stood, and on the wall inside was a plaque commemorating their wedding day, placed there by their children decades after both Jacob and Zara had passed. It reads simply, Jacob and Zara Harris, married September 15, 1878, a love that built a legacy. James Harris, their eldest son, lived to be 87 years old, and before he died, he ensured that his mother's journal, the one where she had written down the story of how his parents met, was preserved. It was donated to the local historical society, where it became one of their most treasured possessions. Visitors would come from all over to read Zara's words, written in her careful script, describing that terrifying day in the forest and the man who had saved her with strength born of desperation and love. I held onto his shirt as he pulled me free, she had written. And in that moment, I felt something beyond gratitude, beyond relief. I felt connection, a sense that this man, this stranger who had risked everything for me, was someone special, someone who would change my life forever. I did not know then that I would marry him, would spend my life with him, would bear his children and grow old by his side. But looking back now, from the vantage point of 40 years of marriage, I think some part of me did know, even then. I held onto his shirt, and I never really let go. The generations that followed Jacob and Zara each added their own stories to the family history. Some became ranchers like their ancestor, working the same land he had carved out of the California wilderness. Others became teachers, doctors, business people, spreading across California and beyond, but always carrying with them the story of their origins, of the cowboy and the woman he saved. One of their great-granddaughters became a writer, and she spent years researching and documenting the family history. She interviewed elderly relatives, pored over old letters and documents, and eventually published a book about Jacob and Zara's love story. It became a regional bestseller, and people who had no connection to the Harris family at all were moved by the tale of courage and romance. The logging company that had been responsible for the accident that brought Jacob and Zara together had long since gone out of business, but the forest where it happened was now protected land. A historical marker was placed near the spot where the timber had fallen, though the exact location had been lost to time. The marker told the story in brief, factual terms, but anyone who stood there and looked around at the towering pines could imagine that day in 1878, could picture a young woman trapped and terrified, and a young man who refused to accept that anything was impossible when a life hung in the balance. The Double Bar Ranch, where Jacob had worked before buying his own land, was now a historical site. The main house had been preserved and was open for tours, and guides would tell visitors about Jacob Harris, one of their most famous ranch hands, who had gone on to build his own successful operation. In the bunkhouse where Jacob had once slept, there was a photograph of him and Zara on their wedding day, young and hopeful and so obviously in love that it made people smile to see it. As the 20th century gave way to the 21st, Angels Camp changed in many ways. It grew and modernized, gained highways and shopping centers and all the trappings of contemporary life. But the old town center remained largely unchanged, and the white church on the hill where Jacob and Zara had married was now a beloved historical landmark. Couples came from all over to be married there, drawn by the romantic story of the cowboy and his bride, hoping that some of that enduring love would bless their own unions. The Harris family continued to gather every year on the anniversary of Jacob and Zara's wedding, coming from all corners of the country to celebrate the love that had started it all. They would meet at the ranch, now run by a great-great-great-grandson who had inherited Jacob's love of the land, and they would share a meal, tell stories, and remember the couple whose courage and love had given them all life. At these gatherings, the eldest members of the family would always take time to talk to the youngest, to ensure that the story was passed down accurately, that the lessons Jacob and Zara's lives taught were not lost. They would talk about the importance of courage, of seeing someone in need and acting without hesitation. They would talk about the power of love, how it could transform lives and build legacies that lasted for generations. And they would talk about faith, about trusting that when you meet the right person you will know, even if logic says it is too soon, too fast, too improbable. Your great-great-great-grandfather lifted a tree that should have been impossible for one man to move, they would say to wide-eyed children. He did it because he had to, because another person's life depended on it. And that is what real strength is, kids. Not just muscles, but the will to do what needs to be done, no matter how hard it is. And your great-great-great-grandmother had that strength too. She survived something that should have killed her, and then she had the courage to open her heart to a stranger, to build a life with him based on nothing but faith and love. That is the legacy they left you. Never forget it. The creek that ran through the Harris land still flowed clear and cold, just as it had in Jacob and Zara's time. The oak trees they had sat under were gone now, replaced by younger trees, but the land itself was unchanged in its essential beauty. The California hills still rolled golden in the summer and green in the winter, and the Sierra Nevada mountains still rose majestic against the sky. The land endured, as did the story of the two people who had loved it and each other so deeply. In the small cemetery on the hill, Jacob and Zara's graves were always decorated with fresh flowers, placed there by family members who wanted to honor their memory. Their headstones, weathered by more than a century of California sun and rain, bore simple inscriptions. Jacob's Reed, Jacob Michael Harris, 1853-1921. Beloved husband, father, grandfather, he built a life of love and legacy. Zara's Reed, Zara Zimmerman Harris, 1856-1928. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she held on and never let go. Between the two headstones was a small plaque that someone had placed there decades after their deaths, and it bore a simple image, a pair of hands gripping a piece of fabric. Beneath it were the words, "From a moment of courage came a lifetime of love." And so the story lived on, passed from generation to generation, a testament to the enduring power of love and courage. It reminded people that the most important moments in life often come when we least expect them, that sometimes our greatest blessings emerge from our darkest moments, and that real love, the kind that lasts, is built not just on passion but on choice, on the daily decision to hold on to each other through whatever comes. Jacob and Zara Harris had lived ordinary lives in many ways. They were not famous beyond their small corner of California, did not make headlines or change the course of history. But they had loved each other with extraordinary devotion, had built a family and a legacy that touched countless lives, and had proven that sometimes the greatest heroism is found not in grand gestures but in the simple, daily choice to love and be loved, to hold on when it would be easier to let go, to build a life together one moment, one day, one year at a time until those moments add up to forever. Their story was a reminder that we are all capable of extraordinary things when someone we love needs us. That strength comes in many forms, and that the bonds we forge in moments of crisis can last a lifetime and beyond. It was a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West but timeless in its message. That love is worth fighting for, worth holding on to, worth building a life around. And in the end, is that not what we all want? Someone to hold on to us when we are falling. Someone whose shirt we can grip when the world is crashing down around us. Someone who will lift the impossible to keep us safe. Someone who will build us a home and fill it with love, and give us a reason to believe that happily ever after is not just a fairy tale, but a possibility within reach of anyone brave enough to take it. Jacob and Zara Harris found that with each other, and their story lived on as proof that such love exists, that it is real and powerful and capable of creating beauty that lasts long after we are gone. They held on to each other through decades of life, through joy and sorrow, through triumphs and challenges, and they never let go. And in the end, that is the greatest love story of all. Two people who found each other against all odds and chose every single day to keep holding on.